RaMell Ross was an Oscar and Emmy nominee for the documentary Hale County this evening, and his new film is Nickel Boys, the adaptation of the Pulitzer Prize winning book The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. I just want to start there. You read this obviously acclaimed book, and you're thinking about adapting it. What stood out to you in terms of like why you wanted, like what you could bring to the story, bring it to the screen, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the book's incredibly rich and incredibly rigorous. One of the first things I thought or recognized was just myself and the characters. Obviously, Elwood is, maybe not obviously, but Elwood is a young black man and he goes to a reform school and eventually runs into another one. And it's quite easy to imagine myself as them, specifically Elwood, because I grew up like Elwood with a lot of love and like suburban household. And you're always terrified of something happening that sends you off the wrong path, or not that there is necessarily a right path, but where, a single mistake determines the rest of your life in a way that's tied to sort of racism or systematic oppression.
Then you obviously the twist of the film, I guess I would call it, or I don't even know it. You use obviously first person perspective to tell this story, which is something I've not really ever seen before,
Mm.
at this scale certainly. And I guess like I think it's like it seems like it's a revolutionary choice. Why was that the choice you wanted to make to visually tell the story?
Yeah, it kind of, I don't know if I could have told the story any other way. I'm fortunate to have been supported by producers who didn't question the idea, and we headed into the writing process, of course, with that in mind and building images around that sort of single point perspective. But to me, there's almost nothing more interesting and fundamentally um, almost religious about the camera. I think the camera is sort of Christian. It does something that intensifies objectification, for lack of a better word. It kind of like fundamentally separates. You're always a voyeur. You know, um, it's outside of you, and things are outside of you. But I always wonder what would have happened if the camera was born into, into Buddhism or a zeitgeist like Taoism, in which the world is more fluid, in which I think only maybe the thing that's most consistent across religious context is the idea of self, maybe that the self needs to be dissolved eventually. So I wonder like what happens when you bring the camera into your body and you allow people to be as approximately synchronized with your point of view. And that's interesting, I think, in the 60s for a young black man.
100%. I was also wondering this. I certainly not, not that's really good, but I was wondering this too, like in terms of I feel like a lot of especially younger people now are experiencing video first person, right? Because of social media or just like
This is
you're so used to
what
this,
I'm
right?
saying. Yeah, it's
So,
everyone's doing it. Everyone's been doing it forever. Like why hasn't someone, yeah, sorry.
and so exactly right. So yes, and I was thinking this. Do you notice then in terms of like this is have you noticed I guess a split or not even a split, but have younger audiences who watch the film are they responding to it differently than like an older audience because this is the way younger people are consuming videos and content, or not that this is content, I apologize, but you know what I mean,
Mm.
like are consuming things like that anyway. And I guess is it more intuitive or like for them to watch a film like this?
I want to say yes. I wish I had like the bandwidth to have done genuine research and maybe the economics or statistical wherewithal to make true causations or correlations or whatever language they would use. I do find that a lot of the older generation, for lack of a better word, they always say it took a little time to adjust. And once they adjusted, they really fell into the film. And very rarely, I think, do the younger ones, and I have no idea what age younger one starts or ends. So,
Me neither.
but yeah, I very rarely get that comment. But for the most part, um, people recognize that it is something that's out there, and I think they seem like they appreciate that it's applied to the story.
The other thing you do in this film, obviously, which I was there's obviously so much violence in the book, and like it's a
Mm,
violent story, but it's a PG-13 film, so you're not
hmm
depicting the violence. You're depicting the violence on screen, but not like graphically, and not in a way that I think another version of the story you could imagine it being told. And why was that the choice for you to do for this?
Yeah, I think it's important to think about the relationship between who's been exploring communities with cameras over time from either news footage or, social documentary purposes, and who's not been sort of in charge of their own image. And I think For people of color, I speak generally about them slash us. Um, you know, we've not been taking images of ourselves. And I think even in the case in which we do, specifically in cinema, we're constantly trying to necessarily be involved with the narratives that have come to our culture has emerged from, which is a lot of struggle and a lot of transcendence and a lot of trauma. And I think through both of those processes, we have fundamentally over-indexed on images of violence on like quote unquote black bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's kind of a challenge to just think about other ways of connecting with the trauma that the characters are going through and hopefully maybe explore the more complex ways that trauma and violence happen. Like trauma and violence are psychological as well. They're oral, they're sonic,
Mm-hmm.
they're visceral, and they span time in a way in which you can, of course, through different cinematic techniques, but it's really difficult to get to that by showing the thing itself.
Yeah, I think, and obviously in this film too, I think the power of it, there's like when I'm thinking back to it, it's like it feels very violent, even though it is only, you know what I mean? Like there
Hmm.
are so many horrific acts happening, but it's not on screen in the way that, like, yeah, it's really interesting and it's really great filmmaking. So you talked like in terms of connection and stuff. You have all these great actors. It's a great ensemble. All of them now acting either to camera, like because it's first
Hmm.
person or whatever, and or not. Like I don't know what I call it, like second part. What would you call, like what do you call, what did you call like the scenes of like in the present day of the film with like Daveed Diggs' character and stuff? Like those are two,
Hmm.
the styles obviously are way different from I think how actors are taught. So how did you like kind
Yeah.
of make sure that they were giving the right perform, like getting those performances that you get? How did you kind of do that basically?
I put it in the hands of a greater power, Chris. I mean,
Okay.
I am no I make no uh I do not pretend to be the person that makes that happen, you know? I think with the camera, it's interesting to think about POV and what that means. We called it sentient perspective or
Hmm.
sentience perspective on set. And once you establish that context, you can then therefore make decisions that are still true to whatever language you've built, that may read as third person, but I would call those more sort of disembodied first, um,
Hmm.
because obviously there are reasons why adult Elwood is the way that he is, and there's certain things
Hmm.
that happen to him that would cause, if we're making the camera an organ, would cause it to be sort of separated.
Did
And
you
so,
have like, yeah, no, go ahead. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
no, 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 please, please, please.
How did like how did you do that? But how did you do, like do you have something on like David's like back? Like how did you kind of get that shot?
Yeah, we used this thing called a snorri cam. It's like, known from like Requiem for a Dream when they have it like up and you're like running in, it's all crazy. But normally they're using, smaller cameras. But Jomo Frey, who's a fairly masterful DP, was like very insistent on his grip crew, like basically inventing a rig that could hold the Sony Venice in Rialto mode we were shooting on. So it was a 6K camera off David's back, and we asked David specifically for this role because of the range in which he performs. He's done theater, he does film, he does music, and he shows like a very his spatial intelligence drew us to him. And we immediately we put the rig on him. It's really heavy, maybe 30, 40 pounds or something. And we give him the monitor, and then he starts to sort of really start to manipulate space and realize that like as he opens up his shoulders and he's pointed at a 15-degree angle this way, like that's a little bit more open to the person, and the way in which maybe our self-conscious minds are when we're um in a social setting which is tense. He's able to articulate through his body, and because the audience isn't looking at his face, they begin to read those cues, which was really interesting.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's like I guess it's almost hard to describe how it works so well on film, but you really, once you see it, it's just like, oh my God, I cannot get this out of my mind. RaMell Ross, the film is Nickel Boys, coming soon to theaters and Amazon as well. Thank you so much for doing this.
No, thank you for having me.